All right, tell me when is it recording?
It's recording.
Oh, okay. Okay. Welcome to Mido and Baba episode, The Return, I guess. I think it's been, a year, maybe 2 years since we've done this?
It's been a while, yeah.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, but we were feeling inspired from the conference and just the overall craziness that's happening right now. So we're back. You have anything you want to say? I don't know.
No.
No? Okay.
I just follow your lead.
I have grown. People have told me from the conference. I'm now my third year in college, and I've learned a lot of more important stuff, I think. So we'll see if that comes through today. We'll start out with my first question. So there's pretty much no question now that America is falling into a fascist, you can say oligarch, dictatorship, whatever. And I wanted to ask specifically your opinion on someone who came from a dictatorship regime in Egypt. What are some of the signs you've seen? Maybe what are some of the ways that you see we can get out of this? If there is even any getting out of this. Yeah. Kind of, I think, a question that's been on everyone's mind.
Well, the signs are, that's an easier question because the dictatorship is always when you have an oligarchic elite, usually a group of people who have an unequal amount of power, whether that power is weapons or money, but it's something that gives them an inordinate amount of power in relation to others. And they come to believe that it's very much, they come to believe that they have, how do I put this? The right, the right to exercise a trusteeship over people. So in other words, that they have the path to what is good and right and righteous, and whether, regardless of whether they actually represent institutions of law, whether they actually represent the people that they rule over, for whatever reason, whether this comes from a belief in God, whether it's a belief in history, whether it's a belief in tradition, whatever, that they have a manifest destiny. They have and fundamentally, because this question of like what growing up in a dictatorship and what we see in the United States today, what are the parallels? The parallels, quite simply, the lack of respect for legal institutions and the rule of law.
Right.
Is that you're saying, I'm going to do what I believe I have a right to do, and this is regardless of what a constitutional document says, regardless of what the balance of power within a nation say, regardless of what the institutions of the country say, and regardless of, and you believe because you have that right to control the institutions of the country and to ignore the laws of the country. So yeah, it's, I mean, there is, of course, we haven't gotten, and hopefully we don't get to, we haven't gotten in the United States to the point where if you express your opinion, security forces show up at dawn and disappear you.
Right.
Where they take you and torture you, and just because you criticize the government. We haven't gotten to that point. But the problem is that the path we're on right now will get us to that point.
We're getting there with ICE, and I mean,
Yeah, once ICE, once, it's always starts with, dictatorships always start with targeting the weakest elements in society. And the weakest elements in American society are non-citizens. But very recently, I mean, there was a congressman from Texas who, for instance, told Mahdi Hassan, the Muslim journalist, to go back home. And he told him to go back home because he's Muslim. Well, that type of attitude where you say, I don't care what the law says, I don't care that you're a US citizen, I don't care that you've naturalized, I don't care that we have rules of the game that define who belongs to the society. You think that this country belongs to you, and because it belongs to you, you have the right to exclude others. That's the heart of what the nutshell of what a dictatorship is. And dictatorships cannot coexist with rule of law. It's very difficult for dictatorships to coexist with rule of law. The harder question is, what I don't believe in predestiny. I don't believe anything is predestined.
right.
I believe that God writes destiny God writes destiny in direct reaction to what we decide.
Yeah.
Otherwise, rational choice and freedom of choice. If enough Americans become alert to the danger and insist on uprooting people who represent exclusionary values, in other words, taking them out of power, voting them out of power, and insist that the rule of law must be restored, and insist that the whole idea of a democracy is that it's anchored in human rights and civil rights, and that in a democracy it is not okay to violate the rights of people just because they're not citizens. It's not okay to mistreat people. So, for instance, there was recently a Harvard lawyer who's talking about how ICE has created these prisons which forces people into servitude, into basically they arrest people and have them work 60 hours a week for practically no pay. And that because these prisons are privately owned, the prisons that entered into contracts with ICE, and so they're actually making money off the labor of these aliens who are working for free, for ridiculous hours. Well, servitude, as the U.S. Constitution says, servitude is inconsistent with a democratic system based on civic rights and human values. And it all depends. It all depends on what your generation, because your generation is really the critical generation right now, decides is acceptable for this country, and what will represent America for the foreseeable future. I mean, what is your sense about, like, your people in your generation? Are they, because the most dangerous thing for a democracy is when people become jaded and become apathetic.
Yeah.
They let it happen. What's your sense, I mean, about what?
Sure. Honestly, I have a hard time speaking for the majority because I'm kind of weird. But I get the sense that we are genuinely more aware. I mean, media obviously, but there's a rise of intellectuals who are highly aware of what's happening in America. And there is like almost a common search among these people to find some sort of solution to this. I think a lot of us realize that we're at kind of America's apex of, a downfall. And people are kind of hastily searching there. I've seen a lot of people who love Frantz Fanon because they're hastily searching through books trying to find some sort of answer, and that usually leads them to other colonial projects like Algeria and whatnot. So I have hope with our generation.
I mean, what one of the critical things is this whole notion, because it's going hand in hand with the turn to the fascist turn or the fascist fork. The idea of a Christian America. It's sort of it's a bit, it's sad. It really is tragic, because the same people who are racist, the same people who are exclusionary, the same people who are embracing vulgar capitalism, meaning immoral capitalism, that the rich have the right to be above the law, the wealthy have the right to dominate everyone else, are also the same people who are embracing Christianity as a vehicle for achieving all of that.
They're so highly hypocritical because, they have the love thy neighbor and whatnot, but like you say, they just support the eradication of immigrants and whatnot.
But what is, I mean, how does I've often wondered about this, like someone in your generation, how does the idea of a Christian America, because that's the rallying call, strike you?
I mean, one, the Christian aspect of it is, for me, one of those like really scary things, because I had a professor tell me that religion is as deeply ingrained as your politics, and vice versa. So when I hear that Trump, has taken base with that far-right Christian conservative valued people, and then that's reflected throughout society, it scares me because it enables him to, and his followers, to, like you say, believe that they're doing the right thing and use that as a justification to harm people, to rip them out of their homes, to quell intellect.
I wonder, of course, it's hard to but I mean,
there's
I wonder, like, in terms of your generation, because I notice that all the people that are talking about Christian America are much older. They're really people who are my age and around my generation, more or less. But I wonder how it is in your generation. Do they, are there a lot of people actually buy into this?
I think the people who buy into it, especially on college campuses, are minorities. It's like a vast, not minorities, but is a vast minority. But I think, honestly, a lot of people my age are turning away from religion. I mean, it's the same story, but seeing that the far, like the Christian values are the ones, not even the values, but the Christian people are the ones hand in hand with all this oppression, racism, whatnot, is completely turning them off from religions. Like there's so many people I see now that just don't have any sense of God, or the sense that they have in God is not one that's directly tied to organized religion, but they have the strong morality because they feel like they can't get those strong morals in the religious communities. So I mean, it's the same.
I mean, I think, it's always what has always undermined religious institutions is the hypocrisy is generational hypocrisy. That when because this is a constant has been a consistent theme. I mean, it was the hypocrisy of the violence committed by repeated crusades and the sheer brutality of these crusades and soldiers returning back home, and what these Christian soldiers, the savagery of these Christian soldiers once they came back home, which ultimately led to the age of secularism, which ultimately led to society sort of saying, in Nietzsche's statement, God is dead, and we are going to build societies without God. But we keep getting caught into the same cycle where people embrace religion, but pass the demonic through religion, because what really comes out is really shaitani. It's really about shaitan, demons.
So, I mean, I think there will be that same, like, I don't think we're going to escape that cycle in this generation, but I think there's going to be a lot more people, my age, who can recognize, that level of shaitan. What was it that you used?
I called it shaitani. But
The shaitan, yeah, who recognize that in their religions and try their best to not pass it down to their kids. Because this is one of the things with like technology, and let's see if I can make this connection. There's so many people my age who are now looking, like we're starting to get to that age of like, oh, how am I going to be a parent? There's this movement to really remove technology and not place them in front of an iPad because they realize the damage it did to them or their nephews or whatnot.
Well, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there are people who are smarter about it, but I don't know if it's the majority, honestly.
Well, I mean, the issue with technology is that's
It's a whole nother topic.
yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a lot to be said to trying to develop the intellect without the lazy shortcuts of technology. Because I really do believe that but I mean, that's a different topic, but I really do believe you lose IQ. If you want to develop your intellectual abilities, maximize your natural intellectual abilities, then you should wean yourself, because your brain is like a muscle. The more you practice it, the stronger it gets.
I mean, I think I see that especially with like AI, and I don't want to bring the conversation to that because that's a whole different can of worms.
Yeah.
But there are people who will let the AI think for them, and I think that's scary.
That's
And
the temptation of. I mean, human beings are always tempted by whatever is the easiest path.
and it's the question is like, is there going to be a whole religion that develops around AI? But anyway, I guess my question, the reason I started out with the question about America is because America's different, I feel like, from other colonial projects or oppressive projects, where it has had centuries to intentionally move towards this level of like layered oppression. So one example I saw is like Reagan. Reagan was given this handbook, very similar project to 2025, by the Heritage Foundation, the same exact one. Mm-hmm. And we see the damage that Reagan did. There's no denying that. So I think it's scary because not only is it intentional and strategic, but it's also had time to learn and evolve in a way that, I mean, in my understanding of other projects, like the other projects didn't. Do you get is that?
Well, I mean, I think I understand what you're getting at. It is, the American Empire and American colonialism, because you are right. America has acted not just within the United States, with indigenous people, Native Americans. But in so many places around the world, America has acted like a colonial power, like, colonial power that believes that it has the right to rule over other nations, to exercise, instead of it being the right to self-determination, basically to decide for people how their fate will go. It has done this around the world. It has done this from the Philippines to Japan to South Korea to the entire Muslim world, practically Malaysia, Indonesia, to countries throughout South America. It has done this again and again. It is amazing that America, like, think of your generation and how many members of your generation are really aware of the number of military bases that the United States has over the world.
Yeah.
The United States, effectively, the military bases that the U.S. has around the globe, if you look just at a map and put a dot every place the U.S. has troops positioned or has a military base, you realize that the U.S. is a colonial entity that dominates all over the world.
It looks like a Christmas tree. Like,
yeah, and very few places like China or Russia, that very few places where the U.S. doesn't have a military presence. But the biggest thing, though, is that in the past, colonial empires did not hide their colonialism. They said, yeah, we are an empire, we are colonial empires, we colonize. It's true that what they said is, we colonize for your own good. That has always, the British Empire especially, and the French Empire and the Dutch Empire, always had this white man's burden. We are white people.
We're the saviors.
We're the saviors.
Yeah,
We're civilized. You're backwards. You're primitive because you're dark-skinned. You're not as intelligent as the white man. And so our job here is to civilize you. We're coming to colonize you, to civilize you, and teach you how to be human beings. So that sinister logic was out in the open. That racist, sinister logic was out of the open, and there was no denial that the colonial powers didn't say, "Oh, we deny that that's how we are," or that we're racist. The big twist with American empire is that the United States began its imperial age by saying no more empire and no more colonialism. And the U.S. has insisted that it is very, very, very different than the white man's burden, that this is all about teaching the world about the right to self-determination, liberation and freedom and democracy and so on. But when you actually look at the actions, not the words, but the actions of the United States, you actually see that there is absolutely, self-determination is reserved for white people. So it hasn't really changed. The liberation and right to be free is really reserved for white people.
Yeah.
And countries like Japan, I mean, it's very interesting because I recently learned that since World War II, Japanese politics have never been free. The U.S. controls Japanese politics.
Yeah.
And the only freedom countries like Japan or South Korea or so many other countries in the world, or the Philippines, have is basically the right to create material products and to consume material products, money.
Yeah.
But when it comes to politics, it's all controlled by the U.S. So and the irony is that the genocide in Gaza is what sort of laid all of this out in the open. It stripped away all the lies and deceit and all that this is an empire that really never believed in human rights and never believed in democracy and never believed in any in self-determination or liberation, all that. That it is a thoroughly hegemonic empire that basically reserved, and the biggest proof of that, you notice, I don't know if you've guys covered this in college, but like the former Soviet republics in Europe were one of the very few cases where a dictatorship crumbled and there was a transition to a democratic order of some sort or another. And it was supported by the United States, and it was supported because these are European white people. But everywhere else in the world, the US has been actually an active agent supporting dictators and dictatorial regimes, and regimes that exploit their own people, not liberate their own people. The story of Bolivia, for instance, is fascinating in that regard, but that's a whole big other topic. But that, you know, when it comes to American citizenry, the big, and this is what we see with the attack on academia, you don't get this perspective. Unfortunately, very wealthy oligarchs control the media. So you're not going to get this, the truth from the New York Times or the Washington Post, or because they're controlled by corporate entities that work in sync with the U.S. government. From my view, your only opportunity to really get this perspective were in colleges that would hire professors who have critical insights.
Yeah.
And it's true that you would have to seek out these professors in college. So in other words, you had to make a point to go take their courses, to see the world from perspectives other than the perspective that is the sort of the official perspective of the US government and the corporate entities that control the world. And that's precisely why we see that the first line of attack, and this is consistent with every country that turned to dictatorship, by the way, is the first targets is always academic institutions. Because the nature of authoritarianism, it abhors intelligentsia. In other words, it abhors intellectuals, and it
any
abhors
critical thinking.
I'm sorry,
Any
critical thinking, and doesn't want it because it sees it as extremely dangerous and destabilizing, and that is a serious concern because you have an administration. Part of its plan is to turn the citizenry actively stupid, to get them dumber, and to basically say, your job as citizens, leave ruling to us, leave organizing this globe to us. Your job is to just do your job and get paid and, buy a car and buy a fridge and buy a TV and not concern yourself, because it is the elite that rule the world for you and give you your jobs and give you your food and give you your little items that you can consume. And other than that, if you still have extra time, get busy with things like drugs and sex and, fun things, but don't concern yourself with critical thinking or serious thinking and so on. And this is the thing. No civilization has taken this step without crumbling.
Yeah.
And the reason the United States has become such a dominant power in the world is the United States is really not one country. The United States is 50 countries into one country. Without that, can you imagine if the United States basically was the income of one state? But it is 50 different countries that have unified their resources, and that's why they dominate the world.
Yeah.
But if the ultimate how civilizational decline looks like is that in the same way that you have a club of elites that ignore the masses and rule for the masses, you start finding that cracks and dissensions start creeping in as other people say, well, why are we left out of the elite club? Let's create our own elite club in our own little state. And then you start having, the disunion come apart at the seams.
Yeah.
And that is how civilizations end.
Yeah. Okay, I had other questions, but this is more interesting to me. These cracks that form, I feel like America is scary and American dictatorship is scary because they've looked to other countries and seen where those cracks form and are plugging them as they come up. So like the example I'll give is, Trump also has the Supreme Court in his pocket, and he also is in a prime place to put 2 more Supreme Court justices. So his rule will carry on through, long after he dies, which, So, do you agree that America is uniquely scary because it realizes the failures of other dictatorships and learns from them?
I mean, honestly, the way the Trump administration has been acting since it has come to power makes me doubt that very much.
Yeah. Okay, good. That's why I want to hear. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just what's actually scary to me is that this whole idea of a Christian America it was decisive when the United States was established. Mm-hmm. It's decisive, it ignores the age of secularism. It ignores the fact that can you imagine when 200 years ago, when most of the citizens, most of the colonial settlers of the US, not most, nearly 100% were Christian, right? And they forced slaves to become Christian and forced Native Americans to become Christian. But today, to pretend that this is a Christian country is insane.
Yeah.
Because even if you just count the atheists, I mean, those who just don't believe in a God at all, or the agnostics, or the many different factions of Christianity, the Catholics who do not agree with the version of a Christian country, I mean, and then leave alone many other, the pluralistic, diverse tapestry that it's a very dangerous idea, because what it will ultimately lead to is various people having to confront the question, am I willing to live in a country that is controlled by Christians and ruled by Christians, and in where Christians have the right to tell whoever they want, get out of here? And if the answer is no, it is inevitable that this will lead to a form of civil war. Yeah. So how can you be smart or intelligent if you are taking your country down a road that will lead to either you have to exercise Nazi-like oppression, where you're sending people to the gas camps to get rid of them, or you have to confront a civil war. But both solutions, if you send people to gas camps, those who are truly Christian are not sufficient to uphold an American economy that controls the globe the way you control the globe now. So the dollar will plummet, the financial institutions will plummet because there are no workers. If there is no gas chambers and you go to civil war, again, that means the country goes down. So the trajectory that this fantasy world that sort of the Christian right lives in, that we're going to pretend that everyone is, that this is a white country and this is a Christian country, and leave alone the fact that in the history of Christianity, no one in the history of Christianity, there's never been a consensus as to what Christian values are.
Yeah.
You know, the history of Christianity is one of to put it nicely, constant diversity. And there's a great deal of diversity between. So even those people who call themselves Christian and they want to cut medical care, they want to cut welfare, they want to not pay taxes, well, there are an equal number of Christians that would say that this is entirely inconsistent with what Jesus stood for. Jesus, you know, this is the man who preached that, you know, a rich person, the chances of a rich person going to heaven is the chances of an elephant going through the eye of a needle, right?
Yeah.
And so they Christians like that will look at what these people like Trump are doing and say, we don't see Christianity at all. So you're taking and this is why I really, if people wake up, they'll see that really this is not about Christianity at all.
Yeah.
This is simply about good old white racism. You know, it's like what they're doing is they're taking us back to a day when in the South, blacks could be lynched. You could spread lies about blacks, like you spread lies about aliens today. And in the South, what a lot of people don't know because they don't study history is that lynching of blacks were not done saying, oh, we're just lynching blacks for no good reason. It was always justified that these blacks are raping white women.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then when historians would look at the details, they would say that it's a complete fabrication. There were no raping of white women. They would just go and attack these innocent blacks. And often they would attack black business owners, you know, basically to keep the black economy down. Yeah. It's the same, you know, the politics of racism work in the same way, and the same logic of, oh, you know, these foreigners are committing crimes and they're all Trump just very recently was talking and saying, oh, they're all agitators, they're all criminals, they're all evil people. You talk about the left, and that sort of racist outlook of darker skinned people are demonic in some form, and we white people are angelic, not because of what we do, but just because we're favored by God. We're chosen people. I think, you know, it's the same thing. Like, to what extent is Trump Christian at all? I mean, this is a man with a
not at all.
Yeah. So it's but I really, I mean, this is the part of me that I think the most dangerous thing, in my opinion, is to surrender. The most dangerous thing is for young people to. This is the future, because there's another thing I've learned growing up in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. I know what happens when you lose your country. That is the worst of all. When you're like, I can't visit Egypt now, right? Yeah. I can't even go back home. I can't see the places where I grew up. I can't have the nice safety of just people who speak my language, who I share memories with. You know, that level of comfort. When you become a refugee from your own country, the level of trauma you experience is indescribable. Mm-hmm. And if your generation doesn't fight for this country, they could find themselves in that position where you're American, but America now is a Christian America, and you have no place in that Christian America, and you have to be a refugee in Canada or Europe or God knows where. And believe me, the level of trauma you would feel is, it just, you have to experience it. You can't even put it in words, except maybe in a few novels that have been able, like there's a novel called Things Fall Apart by, I forgot where he's from, but he's an African writer. It's a very powerful novel. But basically, as the title of the novel indicates, things fall apart, where suddenly you don't know where your place in the world is anymore.
Yeah. Well, I'll say good news is I think at least 2 chapters from that book were assigned to me in my courses. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, higher ed's doing something all right. Yeah, I guess.
You should read the entire novel.
Yeah.
It's really worth reading.
I will go back for it. Yeah. Okay, I have 2 more topics I want to talk about.
Yeah.
I'll let you choose which one you want to cover first. The place of violence as resistance in America, or how to interact with, white moderates, people who stick their head in the sand.
Man.
2 huge can of worms.
Yeah, the harder one is those people who stick their head in the sand. Because I unfortunately, that's the experience of that when I left Egypt, I can't tell you, most of my family would have fit in that category exactly.
Yeah, no, and the question stems because now as I'm growing up and my friends are becoming aware, they're saying into 2 succinct categories. The one that's, oh, okay, I know what's going on, or I don't really do politics, I just focus on the things that affect me, and so, yeah.
All I can say is that, it's very, I remember a lot of my family members and friends who did not want to get involved, did not, apolitical. Mm-hmm. And when I look now at their lives, none of them escaped the effects of dictatorship. Yeah. In fact, dictatorship has corrupted them to the core and ruined their lives. Yeah. And so what you do about them, I honestly think, when I think back, I think that every time I allowed them to exist in their apathy without taking a strong stand against them, without telling them very loudly what you're doing is immoral and wrong, because of course you have your family members, your elders telling you, be nice, don't confront them, don't argue with them, don't fight with them. And you know what? With all due respect to my elders, they were wrong. Because I didn't do them any favor, and I didn't do myself a favor when I just allowed them to exist. In fact, the confrontation, the demand to, for instance, a very practical example, when Trump was elected the first time, I can't tell you the number of people who would say, and people who are, were friends with me, oh yeah, Trump might be an Islamophobe, Trump might be a racist, but there are other aspects, and that's okay with me. And when I think back, no, I should have said, well, if that is the way you feel, that an Islamophobe and racist is okay with you, then you are not okay with me. I'm not going to continue having a relationship with someone who's okay with racism and put them in a situation of shaming them, because I have no other power but to exercise that power of shaming. As to the issue of violence, violence is very dangerous when I'm not a pacifist. I'm not against violence in all situations, but when you use violence against an all-powerful state like an organized state, whatever measure of violence you are going to bring, they're going to respond with violence that's going to evacuate you. It's going to make you disappear off the face of the earth. So I don't think violence is actually smart when the power relationship is so unequal.
Yeah.
I do think that there are other ways, like economic boycotts, organized protests that basically hurt them where their pocket is. Because hurting with your pocket, so for instance, if there's enough consciousness and enough of a movement to make it a point to buy from local markets rather than these big corporate entities, to redirect your purchasing power and effort, although it will take, but to persuade people that we have to resist these oligarchs, and because what we've witnessed in Nazi Germany, and other, in Russia, through the history of the Soviet Union, and other situations with Sukarno in Indonesia, and other examples like that, is that the state has the power to react with such overwhelming violence that it not just destroys, but it reinvents the narrative. So, for instance, the narrative of the Black Panthers. Till today, it is very hard to teach students any perspective about the Black Panthers other than the perspective of the US government, the official perspective. To reclaim the voices, the innate voices of members of that movement that stood in a somewhat violent confrontation with the state, not really, it's very difficult. And that is the sometimes if you have a complete rebellion, that might be different. I mean, because violence, we have to distinguish with someone who plants a bomb, basically terrorist attacks. Well, that's it's just not smart and not moral. But massive insurrections, like standing up against a dictator in some type of form of armed rebellion, as long as you think through the consequences of a total armed rebellion, not magical thinking, not fantastical thinking, but thinking through what will happen in the armed rebellion and what the consequences will be. Sometimes that's justified. One of the courses I used to teach at the law school, a course on political crimes. I mean, I actually theoretically could still teach it, but it just, and we would talk the whole class about the right, whether there's a right to rebel. And in my view, sometimes violent rebellion is morally justified because you are fighting oppression. But as long as you do so after thorough moral thought as to the consequences of that rebellion, that it is not, poking the hornet's nest and then dying. because that doesn't achieve anything. In fact, that ultimately feeds into the narrative of of demonizing the other and demonizing their opponent and making their opponent seem crazy and insane and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I asked that question because I see the sentiment now of people saying, we should hold ICE violently accountable. They wouldn't do what they did as confidently as they did if they knew there was some sort of threat to their life.
I think, I honestly think, I don't think, no, I think that would, I disagree with that because I think that the confrontation was a violent confrontation with ICE, it, but there should be mass demonstrations against the policy because there's a critical issue here. Trump's policies are ignoring the role of the legislature entirely. It's sort of, Trump is becoming the legislative branch, the executive branch, and by ignoring court decisions, also effectively the judicial branch. That deserves massive demonstrations. That deserves massive strikes. That deserves millions of people marching and saying, we will not allow you to continue doing business as usual and make profits and sell products because you are stealing the country. And today, you've built all these, used taxpayers' money to build all these concentration camps. And today, we see that you are taking people who you claim violated immigration laws, but tomorrow we know that we might be, as US citizens, being put in these concentration camps. I think that deserves a massive response. I think the dichotomy of either violence or nothing is a very false one.
Yeah.
It is, and even someone like Malcolm X, for instance, who is by no way a pacifist, but at the same time, Malcolm X didn't preach violent resistance. He preached active, effective resistance. He said we can be effective because if you carry a gun against the white man will carry a tank against you and will just blow you off the face of the earth. And what Malcolm X was in a very eloquent way was teaching is that at the same time to pretend that you can appeal to the good heart of the white man and say, please, give me a place on the table, that's nonsense as well.
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
Right.
I think that the danger is real. And unfortunately, for I think people who want to get more substance, I would really suggest listening to Chris Hedges or reading Chris Hedges, because I think he has his finger on the pulse of American politics and the real dangers of this fascist turn and how it can go south very quickly, how it suddenly we can all wake up and we find that we're living in a dictatorship where people like Chris Hedges himself would be arrested and disappeared. Yeah. And that's when, and I don't think normally people your age can't imagine how painful becoming a refugee in your own country is when suddenly you find that you have no place in your own country, because it's not exactly like the rest of the world opens its arms to you. The rest of the world basically, sees you as a problem, and it's like as a burden, and in turn you see yourself as a burden, And when you see yourself as a burden, you develop all types of emotional, psychological problems and trauma that are so difficult to heal from.
Yeah.
You just constantly feel, I'm a burden to this world. I have no place in this world.
Yeah. Okay, one more popped up. Maybe something a little bit more hopeful is people my age are realizing that American democracy is dying as anyone knew it. So the question of how to rebuild, how to, reinstate the strength of the rule of law, and whether it's better to try and remake what America was without the oppression, of course, or to try build something new.
I mean, there are. If I was a strategist, there are certain things that have to change before we think of like trying to build anything new. But there are certain things that have to change. Among those things, there's a book called Black Money, by the way, that is a very powerful book. It talks about how a single Supreme Court decision that basically allowed, it was by these justices that, majority, it was a 5-4 decision with, the right-wing justices ruling. But what that Supreme Court decision basically did is that it allowed corporations to have unlimited spending to influence politics.
Yeah.
And that is what is known as black money. It's and how that one decision has had an enormous corrupting influence on American politics.
Yeah.
If I was a strategist, a decision like that has to be reversed. The spending of political PACs on politicians, the law has to be rewritten where you do not allow, but anyone running for office, there should be a public treasury, a public money, that if you get certain amount of votes, you get money from that public treasury or from that fund, where you control how all the different candidates, how much they can spend. And so basically all the candidates are spending the same amount.
Yeah.
And this idea of, you have this lobby group and so on secretly coming and buying off this candidate, that has been the linchpin that corrupted American
Yeah.
politics.
I saw this study, like this guy did, he said like 93% of people in Congress are paid by AIPAC.
Yeah,
And it's
they control and they get rich and they have these contracts even after they go out of office. And it became a cesspool. But then there also the whole electoral college system has to be abolished because it is completely nonsense, and it has to be simply popular vote. I mean, this whole notion of the whole law of gerrymandering.
Yeah.
I mean, it absolutely makes no sense that the Supreme Court has repeatedly allowed ideological gerrymandering, the way you are racially carving to basically ensure to get votes.
Well, now they're encouraging it.
It's the most undemocratic things. These are immediate, real life fixes. Among also the fixes, there has to be the Bill of Rights. Like for an example of that, cruel and unusual punishment. The way Supreme Court has interpreted this has literally abolished the meaning, has completely erased all meaning to that constitutional provision that prohibits cruel and unusual punishments. So the very interpretation of basic rights and fundamental rights, including the right to privacy, has to be beefed up and become more fundamental. I think fixes like that, I think that it has to be a constitutional provision that says this country does not have a religion. I mean, if it's not clear enough between separation of church and state, well, we need a constitutional amendment that says no one can claim that this country has a religion and no religious practices should be allowed. A government is not allowed to, so in other words, to strengthen the separation between church and state, between religion and state. And these are quick fixes that can better protect American democracy and better uphold American democracy without us having to, because building something from scratch is always much harder and fraught with danger.
Yeah.
But when you think, I mean, part of this is studying the history of the Supreme Court. How was the Supreme Court, I mean, how did the Supreme Court become corrupted this way? Why was it corrupted this way? Why was the jurisprudence of the Supreme Court on so many points became so irrational? How did we go from justices like Thurgood Marshall and Justice Brennan to justices that,
Kavanaugh.
like Kavanaugh or Rehnquist, or Rehnquist, of course, is even, anyway. But and because that understanding history is knowing what to do about the future. If you don't understand how things have gone wrong in history, and that's, I think, part of what, even in law school, I mean, I've noticed this in the course of my career. One of the courses that I've taught, or one of the courses I teach, is American legal history. And do you know that, like, law school education in American law schools used to focus on legal theory and legal history, so that if you go to law school, you would learn the history of the highest court on the land and understand, how the history from the moment it was built to whatever. But today in law school, you can go through law school to the top best law schools in the country, and you could go through law school and know absolutely nothing about the history of the court.
Yeah.
And I think that deprecation of education is intentional. It's part of the autocrats like Trump, who says, I can buy 100 lawyers anytime I want. Well, that's exactly what people like Trump want. They want lawyers to be without principles. They want lawyers to be basically like hired guns. They want lawyers to just serve at their beck and call and keep their mouth shut and never fight back. In the same way that they've targeted the legal profession, they started targeting law firms right away, because dictators hate a strong legal order. Yeah. They can't coexist with a strong legal order.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Good? How long was that?
Well, close it out.
Oh, close it out?
Okay.
Thank you, Baba. That is good. It is fun, and we should do this again.
Yes, absolutely. I would love to do it again, and I also really enjoy, listening to your perspective on things, because it's, every generation has to hand over the reins to the generation after it, and when it comes to America, especially your generation, there's a lot counting on it,
Yeah.
This is amazing. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you. And I guess last tag I'll say, if people have questions, just put them in the comment. I feel like a content creator. But if you do have questions, like, I wouldn't mind reading through them and taking some of them and putting them into this. So.
Okay.
Yeah.